Okay, greetings all. My name is Theresa Secord, a member of the Penebscot Indian Nation and a tribal basket maker for the past 30 years. I'm also a proud consultant for the First Peoples Fund, and it's my pleasure today to present a webinar entitled Funding Native Artists, Grants, Fellowships, and Other Creative Income. I plan to present materials, there's a bit to go through for about an hour, and then at the end we'll have a time for question and answer. And what I'll do is read your chat questions, and together with my dynamic partner Tosha at First Peoples Fund, we can make sure everybody's questions get answered. And then the webinar will be archived in our resource kit at First Peoples Fund online in the spring. So to get started, I first want to say this webinar is intended to help artists learn how to find and apply for free arts funding opportunities to help advance their art and creativity. It's comprehensive, yet at the same time, I'm sure there are some additional opportunities and grants out there that I missed. As I was putting the webinar together over the past couple of months, more opportunities were brought to my attention through social media and other sources, which is actually a very good thing, rather to see arts funding opportunities increasing for Native artists than decreasing, which has been something that's happened in the past. If you're an artist, the first thing I want to say, my first tip is make sure you're networking on some kind of social media platform, such as Instagram, Facebook, email lists, so you can watch for opportunities that get posted there. Your artist network community is, really your best source for finding out about opportunities. So to begin, I want to share a little bit about our own grants. First Peoples Fund has been very generous over the past decades, funding artists in business leadership grants, cultural capital grants, and community spirit awards. Hundreds of artists have been in the First Peoples Fund programs, and I'm probably speaking to some of you out there. Hello, you know who you are. The Artists in Business Leadership Grants, or fellowships as we call them at First Peoples Fund, and I'll get into the terminology in just a minute. These are to advance your Native arts business. And these are $5,000 grants. Cultural capital grants help you transfer ancestral and cultural knowledge within your community. This could be a mentor passing on intergenerational knowledge and skills and techniques about a traditional art form from one generation to another. It could be artist workshops, demonstrations, again, within your community. Finally, also a $5,000 grant. And then the Community Spirit Awards are specific nomination-only grants to honor culture bearers who embody the First Peoples Fund values of selflessly sharing their knowledge, skills, and techniques within their community. And that nomination process happens in the summer. For the Artists in Business Leadership and Cultural Capital, those deadlines are September 30th. These are competitive grants. A number of people have tried a couple of times and been successful. So if you're not successful, and that's a theme you're going to hear me repeat throughout this webinar, at any of the arts opportunities that you apply for, try again. This is a great YouTube video that I wish I could show you. We weren't able to technologically pull up the audio on this, but it's a 3-minute video done by Robert Martinez, who's a First Peoples Fund fellow, member of the Northern Arapaho Nation. He takes you through the First Peoples Fund application process in this short video. So you can find the link here. You don't want to type all of that gobbledygook at the bottom of the screen. Go to the First Peoples Fund website. Much of the process that Robert describes here in the 3 minutes will apply to other grants and opportunities that I'll share in the webinar. So I really think it's a good idea to watch something like this, and even how to help set up your account, which I won't say unfortunately, but just the way things are, a lot of grants opportunities are online now. So you need to make an online account. So what are we talking about in the terminology? What's the difference between a grant and a fellowship? As I mentioned earlier, First People's Fund calls our grants fellowships. Other people would call them grants. So basically, the overall umbrella term of grant means that's a sum of money given by the government or a foundation or an organization for a specified art purpose. This is something that doesn't need to be paid back, unlike a loan. A fellowship is sometimes used interchangeably with the term grant, and it may be also used for this one-time, lifetime honoring or teaching recognition. It could be a fellowship, could be a sum of money given for a research position, and I'll show an example of this later, or an internship at a university or a museum. So this could be even a paid position. Or it could be a $25,000 grant from a particular foundation. So you just have to be aware that that term is sometimes used in a multitude of different ways. Artist in residence programs are pretty straightforward. Usually means an artist is having their expenses paid, usually by a museum or an arts and cultural organization, and hopefully a stipend as well, in exchange for the artist coming right in and living on site or close to the museum, in exchange for the artist demonstrating, teaching, sharing their art during a particular length of time. And these can range, the artist in residence, anywhere from 1 week to 2 months. You might be making art with a bunch of school students for a couple of weeks, something like that. Those do vary too in, what's involved, but generally you're brought in as an artist to a museum or a culture center so that you can interact with the public. And usually the museum or cultural center will give you access to collections if they have that, and that can be a great benefit to you. It can give you space and time. If it's a well-paid stipend, you can have space and time to make your own art as well. Art commissions are, this means an artist is hired to create a specific piece of work. It could be private if you're lucky enough to have a collector who likes your work and wants to quote unquote commission you to make a piece of art. And then oftentimes there are public art commissions. And again, I'll show an example of this in a little bit. The final suite of terminology, art workshops, demonstrations, and performances are pretty straightforward. So what I'm listing here is just, ways that artists can think about to diversify their income base in addition to, retail and wholesale sales of their art. And if you're an artist, who is selling your art, you really need to look at this to increase your income base and the diversity of your income base. First People's Fund looks at stages of entrepreneurial and artist development, and so I kind of combined those two in a chart here. I just want to bring your attention to funding opportunities at the bottom of each of these columns. So the foremost column on the left, emerging artists, middle, kind of mid-career artists, and finally the column on the right, established artists. And one of the reasons I thought of showing this visual, I kind of adapted it to show to you, is that sometimes we see artists who are very emerging applying for funding opportunities like major grants and even mid-career artist grants and getting discouraged when they're not selected. And so my advice is to, study this, understand kind of where you are at in your artist path, your artist journey, and, look at what the opportunities are for you. These really shouldn't be solid lines between these columns because all of us kind of range between having, a number of these kind of employment issues in our background. But, probably all of us are doing demonstrations at this point, under funding opportunities. And so that would go across all, from left to right, all three columns. But looking at applying for the smaller grants when you're emerging, looking at larger opportunities like fellowships, private commissions, and as a mid-career artist too, you're starting to participate in art exhibitions if you haven't already. And you might be one of the artists who's selected to give a talk during an exhibition of art that has to do with your genre. I know I always bring in examples of my own work in Maine with the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance, and the artists in this level are, really starting to give talks and participating in kind of all Wabanaki exhibitions. They're not having solo exhibitions yet, which would be in the kind of established artist field. Doing mentoring in their community, again, in the mid-career, and of course that overlaps into the established artist career. Under funding opportunities for established artists, you're really in the field of, and I'm there after 30 years of applying for major grants and fellowships. I won't say I'm always successful, but also I'm guest curating exhibitions, and I'm here working for First Peoples Fund today, consulting. And so I just kind of want to put this out here as a visual, and we'll refer back to it at the end. For me, it's always been helpful to understand, where I'm at on my path, and then I can see where the opportunities might be that I can plug into. I'll give in a couple of examples too of some other established artists that some of you may know about. And also at the established artist stage, as an artist, you should be able to approach museums on your own and nonprofit organizations with your own ideas of work and funded projects. And in this day and age too, museums are being, the decolonizing term, and they really are being more inclusive in their policy and including more diverse artists, not just in their exhibitions, but art in their collections. And I actually sit on the governing board of a pretty prominent art museum in Maine for the first time ever. And I have no doubt that it has to do with their new kind of inclusive policy. But in my work and my philosophy for several decades, working with other Wabanaki artists in Maine, this has always been to our benefit to, try to help educate the museums that are out there. And we've been successful in that in the Maine Indian basketry movement. So moving on, this is Preston Singletary, and he is an established artist. You could see his amazing glass work on the right-hand side of the screen. And he started out, of course, carving Northwest Coast designs. And I show this picture too because of how organized his studio is. I've shown this picture in a number of presentations, and throughout the webinar, I'll share some tips and qualities that other artists who I admire and embody and use. And I encourage you as well to kind of seek out artists in your genre or in other non-traditional mediums that you're not working in, but who are successful, and you think, what are the tips and the keys to success that they're utilizing? Can you seek out mentors, or can these people just, be in your network? But I will say, going back to the organization, being organized will really help you find and be successful in applying for Native Arts funding opportunities. No doubt about that. So these are some links to Native-specific arts grants and fellowships. And again, all these links and information in this presentation will be archived. The slides in themselves will be as well in our resource kit at First Peoples Fund. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but some of these are specific. So the Burke Museum, the Bill Holmes Center is in Seattle, and so that's specific to Washington State. The Siri Foundation, which I'll talk more about in a minute, is specific to artists in Alaska. Native Arts and Cultures Foundation is mostly nationwide. There is a bit of an exclusion on one of their grants, I think the Mentor Artist Fellowship Grant. And then small grants too. Sometimes tribes have art grants, and so be sure and check locally. The Oneida Nation has a really neat little arts grant program for its own artists there near Green Bay, Wisconsin. Seventh Generation Fund, Potlatch Fund. It always makes sense to try to seek out these grants that are Native specific because, otherwise you're competing in a big regional, state, and national scene, which I want to encourage you to do also. But here, seek out first the Native Arts specific grants. A lot of states have mentoring grants, and most people don't realize that. I don't have every state here listed. These are states where I've done work in with, other tribes and groups. But Maine actually had a great, and still do, a traditional arts apprenticeship program that I was associated, and I actually first learned basketry in under my mentor from Indian Island, Maine, a Penobscot basket maker named Madeline Tomer. And so each state has, a number of states have master artist and apprenticeship grants in traditional Native arts. And I also want you to think outside of the box too, where I would say Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, which has a national mentor artist fellowship program, and it's very substantial. I'll talk about it in a minute. But they encourage not just traditional, but contemporary artists to apply as well. And so this was really interesting in the first time where we saw younger, and I worked some with Native Arts and Cultures Foundation on that program, but we saw younger to contemporary artists teaching next generation artists how to do their contemporary work. But the contemporary work was based in TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, traditional arts, cultural knowledge, spiritual knowledge. And so it was really fascinating to see. So I encourage you to go to the website and look at some of the artists and some of the projects. And so it wasn't just this, older, tired traditional arts apprenticeship program where an elder teaches someone in the next generation. So that's a great model, and I hope other foundations and even states could think about adopting that. So always look at your state arts agency. If you're in Washington State, Google Washington State for arts opportunities, arts grants funding. One of the grants I'll show in a minute, I think, is for Washington State only, Artist Trust. So National Mentoring Fellowship recognition, we talked about the Community Spirit Award, First Peoples Fund, and then the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Heritage Fellowship. A lot of times our Community Spirit Award recipients go on to be National Heritage Fellows, and there are maybe a dozen examples of someone doing that. And so that's a really good opportunity. And I've been a reviewer for the National Heritage Fellowships, and I know that they're always looking for new applications. Again, you need to be an artist at an established level. And these are kind of talking about lifetime achievements too. So oftentimes the artist is elderly in that situation. These are additional national grants that Native people have been successful in attaining. Again, some are specific to area. So Artist Trust, I mentioned, the second one down, I believe, is just for artists to apply for grants in Washington State. And I think those range from I can't remember now, maybe $10,000 grants, or to look that up. But the Bush Foundation Fellowship, Jerome Foundation, some of those are just specific to the Midwest or Minnesota. McKnight, I will say, if you're an artist in Minnesota, you really need to be applying for grants, because there are more grant opportunities for artists in Minnesota than really any state around. So states also have project grants, and I meant to say that at the last slide. And so again, looking at the state website, you could find an opportunity to apply for a $1,000 or up to a $20,000 project grant. Again, you're competing with other non-native artists, but sometimes this is an advantage as states look to expand their opportunities into more diverse communities, depending on the state, of course. This is a picture of 2019 United States Artist Fellow Gabriel Frey, and this award was just announced. It's a $50,000 award, and his brother won the same award in 2010 for their excellent ash basketry. The The forecast grant, I believe, is specific to Minneapolis, to Minnesota. Early career and mid-career artists, for example, and there are a number of grant opportunities there, can apply for $8,000 to $10,000 project grants. So it's definitely worth a visit to the state websites and then Google. For example, Arizona Commission on the Arts grants, or a phone to inquire about grants and application deadlines. In Minnesota as well, Region 2 and Region 5 are state arts agency branches who are very friendly, I would say, to Native grant seekers. Private foundations in certain states also award grants and fellowships. As you can see, there are other foundations listed here to look into. Deanne Whitehawk Polk is a First Peoples Fund Fellow who many of us know and love, and she's also a 2019 United States Artist Fellow. And this is some of her art. So this is a contemporary piece. I forgot the title of it, but it's painted to look like porcupine quill work. So again, she was also someone, going back to that Native Arts and Cultures Foundation grant, who was a mentor fellow last year, teaching someone the traditional art, as she knows the process with quill work, etc., and painting on canvas. And so really exciting to see Diani at this established artist level and reaching kind of for the stars and being successful, and so pleased and proud that a First Peoples Fund Fellow and trainer, Diani is also a 2019 USA Fellow. Native Artist in Resident grants, there are quite a number listed here, and I'll go into a couple of them in detail. The National Park Service one is interesting. You wouldn't want to have been in one of those for the last month, but they do have some unique opportunities for you to go and be somewhere in an amazing place, and most of these are in really interesting places where you stay for, like I said, between a week to 2 months and work on your art and, become inspired by the background and by the other people around you and maybe the collections, and just work on your own art as well as demonstrating for the public. And being a Native Artist in Residence also really can help you develop your own professional skills as an artist in the way of presenting. So I think it's a great idea. And the only limitation, again, of course, is, do you have time to leave, your family and your house for a month? That can be a challenge. And these are definitely part of that. And again, the pay just ranges so variably, but they're worth looking into. The Harpo Foundation is interesting in that it's actually in Vermont. So, someone could come all the way across the country to stay in a log cabin in Vermont. And I guess the other artists that are often on site in these artists in residence programs, which is, sometimes attended well by other artists, it can make a really enriching art atmosphere for the participating artists. Sometimes there's a solo artist in residence, and sometimes you're with other artists as well. This is an example of Minnesota Historical Society Native American Artist in Residence program. And again, Minnesota, this is a very lucrative program. The Minnesota Historical Society gives 2 awards per year for $25,000 Native Artist in Residence award. For artists in you can also be from North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, or Wisconsin when you apply for this grant. So it's not just exclusive to Minnesota, but you would be having your residence in Minneapolis at the Minnesota Historical Society. The MHS then goes on to buy art from you, perhaps through their acquisition fund for their permanent collection if they don't have examples of your art. In this case, Pat Cruz, again, who was also a mentor fellow in the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, but he, I think he donated one of his beautiful birch bark pieces. And the Minnesota Historical Society also has $2,500 encouragement grants, because I was told by the director there, Ben Gessner, of this program, that people would be discouraged, when they only give two $25,000 awards per year. And of course, there's going to be quite a few applications for that. And they can't choose everyone. They're going to have, maybe at some point they even flip a coin because there's so many good applicants. And so they have these $25, $100 grants, for, I guess, doing alternative projects and work. So these can be, again, really good opportunities for you personally as an artist. And it certainly is also great for resume building. The Native Artist Fellowship at the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe is another good one. And they give 3 artists in residence fellowships annually. And again, a number of people I know have applied for and received these. The fellowship includes a $3,000 monthly stipend, which is very generous, compared to some only give $1,000. And the housing there, I've heard, is amazing. It's this great, stucco buildings, and you have studio space and supplies, funding, and travel support. So these are great opportunities, and the fellowships are specific to different times. So you can see here between June 15th and August 15th, there's a specific fellowship for traditional Native artistry. There's another one for Southwest artists only, and a third one for women artists. And I believe the deadline might have been in January. I'm not sure. So you have to get right on these, too. And this is something I do each December or January, is just look ahead at your artist calendar and put your deadlines on the calendar. What are the opportunities you're going to apply for in any given year, and make it happen. So, and at least try to apply if you think you're at these levels. And I would say anybody in the mid-career level would be at this fellowship level. And I don't mean to discourage emerging artists, but again, I'm just saying, I think even at First Peoples Fund, we're looking for artists to have 5 years experience before they're even applying for a $5,000 grant. So that's what I'm really getting at, is, trying to get yourself to a level where you're ready for these opportunities too. This is another one that I've heard is very great, the UCross Fellowship, and it's funded by a foundation I listed earlier, the Andy Warhol Foundation. It's a $2,000 stipend. And again, this doesn't sound like much for a month, but they're providing everything else, food, lodging. You're getting, I guess this is in the Powder River Basin near the Bighorns in northeastern Wyoming. And I've heard from artists who've done this UCross Fellowship, that's a really great experience, that the people who run this foundation are fantastic, and that it's very enjoyable experience, and a lot of number of artists who are really gifted and talented participate, and they're there at the same time. And so it's really a good one. I've heard March 1st 2019 is the deadline. And again, looking at the bottom, specific for Native American visual artists. Go after those when it's specific for Native. Tips for funding your art. So this is something I helped develop as part of our curriculum, and it's in the appendix for those of you who are holding on to your Native Artist Professional Development Training manuals. Those of you who've been to a Native Artist Professional Development Training through the 2-day training for First Peoples Fund. And so this is part of the curriculum near the end, that we talk about seeking out opportunities and funding your art through grants and fellowships. And so I'm not going to read all of these tips here, but I am going to pick out a few. Number 2, I think, is really, really important, and we have a great opportunity now with Facebook and websites and things, to just get in contact with other artists who've received grants, whether you know them or not. Introduce yourself and find out what their tips were and how did they receive, or what level are they at for, funding, receiving grants, funding, and fellowships. Definitely having great photos, work samples, promotional video if you're a performing artist. I've seen, and I've been on grants panels, and this is another tip I want to share, is try to serve on a grant review panel at whatever foundation or state granting agency, or even local tribal level to find out what people are looking for when they're reviewing grants. Usually there's an independent panel of artists who are advising the granting foundation. But I will say, going back to number 3, I've seen so many applications fail because the photography wasn't the best. The art was there, everything else, the story that the artist presented, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the best photography of their art was lacking. And so that's a must. And then a lot of times people talk about, not having access to photography and technology. And I just want to encourage you again to try to seek it out. Perhaps, your tribal government can support in that way. I know I've seen this happen at other tribes too, where, the artists have come together and said, can you help us with photography or with internet access, with being able to even come in and use computers from time to time. If you have a community development financial institution on your reservation, or a planning office, or an arts, better yet, an arts and cultural center, don't be shy about going in and asking for support. In the same vein, number 8, call the foundation that you're applying for or trying to seek an opportunity through and ask, for help. Any of these funding opportunities I'm talking about are being provided by generous and, beneficial organizations, people who want to be generous and help. And so you will have people on the other end of the phone line who want to help you be successful in your funding opportunity. If you're putting forward an art project, or want to teach your niece how to make moccasins with you, that's a compelling project, and somebody wants to support you in that. They wouldn't have the grant opportunities if they didn't. But also be clear in what your plan is. And again, I go back to the Native Arts Professional Development trainings, if at all possible, that a tribe could bring in, First Peoples Fund to help artists get ready, because we address a lot of this in portfolio development. I'll get into that in a minute. Always making sure too that you can talk about why this is the moment in time in your life to get a fellowship. And I laugh about it because I think I kind of thought that was a little bit fluffy in the beginning, but now I know, as I continue to evolve as an artist, there's always something you're going for next, there's always a challenge. And so being able to articulate that, and if you're not a good writer, look for somebody, in your support group who is, to help you articulate, why you want to apply for a grant, and why, how to help make your story compelling. So, yeah, not going too much here with this, but this again will be on the website. Not attaching more than what's asked for is important, but attaching all that's asked for. And the other thing too is number 24, just, do not procrastinate. Again, this is another area, when I think about people that I've seen be successful and people that I've seen not being successful, the worst culprits are procrastination and missing deadlines. And if you're really serious about your art, you'll keep a calendar, and you'll get onto applications as soon as possible. I know that's easier said than done in a busy life, but trying to just keep on track and not procrastinate, because submitting an application at the very end, and I know people do it, I've done it, and I'm sure I'm talking to people who've done this in the First Peoples Fund grant deadline as well, but throwing some together in the last week, will show. There's no way around it. And especially a lot of grants opportunities, you really need letters of reference now, and, because they are competitive, you want your application to shine above all others, or at least with the others. And if you've waited till the last minute, it's not going to do that. Talking again about if you have limitations with the internet, and I believe First Peoples Fund does and a lot of foundations still will send you a paper application so you can apply so you won't miss out. I mean, it's ideal to have an account and an internet application, but if that's just, too confounding, call the organization and find out. Okay, enough of that from me, but I do want to encourage you to go to this website, the Theory Foundation, because these are some great grant writing tips in this handbook. It says for Alaska Native artists and organizations, and then Alaska Native Artist Resource Workbook, but you can download these two publications for free, and they really apply universally to in any kind of arts funding opportunity that Native artists are looking for. A lot of great tips and information in here, and I would definitely recommend reading through that. The workbook is really kind of cool because it gives space for like kind of filling out your own answers to making an artist statement, delineating the difference between artist statements and artist bios, which is something that we also talk about in the First Peoples Fund training. But this is an actual resource workbook too, from a kind of a different vantage point in a different place, but I think it's, really applicable. I thought this was a really neat piece within the resource workbook, because a lot of times when we're in the First Peoples Fund, Native Artists Professional Development Training, people talk about this, conflict between self-promotion and marketing and advancing yourself, because really what you're going to have to do is market yourself, within these funding opportunities. You're especially if they are grants and fellowships, you are competing with others, and you can imagine how competitive it is at the $25,000, the $50,000 level. You have to try to, put your best foot forward as much as possible. But I thought this was interesting because I think this Theory Foundation is trying to say at the end, we feel like in our culture, the Western culture, your effort is sharing. We're asking you to share, who you are and what you're seeking opportunity for, and, what your work will be. And so I think that's, kind of interesting. And I think that was really helpful to a lot of traditional artists. Crowdfunding has become really popular in the last, decade, certainly the last 5 years. GoFundMe, Kickstarter, and Indiegogo. And I've gone to each of these sites and searched for Native American art because I thought about doing one once, and I haven't done a crowdfunding project yet. But what I wanted to see was, well, how do people do these, and what are they asking for when they're doing a crowdfunding project? So a lot of us who are on social media, we see our friends and, relatives and other artists doing this. And so you get to see, what they're asking for. But I want to share just briefly a really great example of a successful Kickstarter project by one of our fellows, undertaken about almost 6 years ago now, Rico Whirl, from Alaska. And so this is Native Art Playing Cards, and he in the end encouraged 491 people to pledge $17,000 to help bring this project to life. The interesting part was that he only was asking for $7,500, and so he promoted this project to help him, do an interesting art project. But Rico also, along with his sister Crystal, have Trickster Gallery in Juneau, Alaska, in downtown Juneau. And so those of you who know the Trickster Gallery, they have some really cool products like this, all indigenous designed, and, clothing and skateboard decks and things. But I just wanted to bring this project to your attention. A few things. I love the story that he presents here. So there's a video, which I am not going to play for you because, again, we had audio issues in our demonstration of this webinar. But I want to encourage you to go there if you're not there already, taking a look at some of these videos while I'm going forward. But I love how he describes this. The oldest surviving artifact of Northwest Coast Native design is seen on a piece of wood from over 2,000 years ago. And they've been exploring that art form for centuries. And he chose to feature that style of design called formline on modern day playing cards. And I don't know, so much of this is a great story that, he develops. He talks about what the project is, why, how compelling it is, to him to be sharing and representing the living art of the Northwest Coast, its adaptability, resilience, and quality. And visually, it's just really appealing and a really cool project. And so I think you should definitely take a look at this. And again, sharing his customary Tlingit art. And the cards were actually made by the U.S. Playing Card Company. Another interesting thing to note is who supported this project. And I was thinking, well, there must have been some pretty big funders on this. And interestingly, the largest number of backers on this, 169, were in the $11 to $20 pledge range. Which surprised me. So what are we looking at? Like 20% of the backers went in this very small dollar range, which means he was very successful, Rico, in social media, I believe, and reaching out with this project and, to the smaller funders, which I think is great. Because the bigger, if you go to the larger amounts, the larger gifts are harder to get. There's only one person who pledged over $500, one over $750, one over $950, and none over $1,300. But he is offering a number of swag type things too, which is very cool. But I don't know. I just thought it was a really great example of a native funded project. Yeah, and I just see you do get one deck of cards at $11 or more. So thinking about that, I think he even offered like skateboard decks and things at the higher level, but you don't have to be, I think, that sophisticated. So going back to the presentation, I talk to myself. Let me get back there. And this was, of course, practiced multiple times, but okay, I might need to do something different. Tosha. Okay, we're back. So I guess another thing I wanted to share is it's really critical to have a video and to make a video if you're doing crowdfunding. And these are a great couple of links for you to get some tips on crowdfunding, crowd fundraising, and on how to make your own video. So there's so much information and help out there on the web. I just want to encourage you to, start doing your research and look around and see what's available for support. This is a friend of mine, Gio Soktoma Neptune. He's a Passamaquoddy basket maker, and he wanted to go to the Autry Museum, the Southwest Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, they used to call it, in LA, for the Indian Art Marketplace in November. And all the way from Maine to LA, that is expensive flying. And so he was trying to raise travel money, and he did. I think I checked in on this when it was still like in the middle of the campaign, but I believe he did, gain the full support for that. So it can be as, small as a few hundred, or in this case, he was looking for $1,200, help Gio get to LA. And he had a good story there. And so I just wanted to share that with you. And that's GoFundMe. The previous project with Rico was Kickstarter. So, and I would see too and ask around, friends who are successful in this, what they recommend. Because, yeah, some of the sites take a percentage of your project and some do not. And some of the sites talking about crowdfunding, some will let you keep everything that you raise, and some will not unless you raise your target amount. So it can be a risk, to invest in all of that, and time and making a video and things like that. Although a lot of, homemade videos can be just as effective nowadays. I wanted to put this visual in. Again, this is tying our work back into our webinar back into First Peoples Fund philosophy and research that we've done. So over the years, First Peoples Fund has understood that these are 6 resources that Native artists need to be successful entrepreneurs and community artists and cultural leaders. And I will say this is tying into your grant writing and funding opportunity seeking, is understanding what your unmet need is. And so understanding where you need financial support. You may say in a grant application, well, I have the training and knowledge, as a traditional artist, but I need to buy supplies so I can teach a workshop in my community, And so I just wanted to share this visual briefly to help you think about making a case, for your art needs. And it really doesn't hurt to tie into some of the things we all know. Like this was work that was done over several years and through a number of surveys, and came up with this visual for helping us understand at First Peoples Fund where we can be most effective with our support, not just in Artist Fellows support, but also in some of the Indigenous arts ecology work that we're doing on a larger scale with community development financial institutions in Indian country. So not to go into detail about that, but that's on our website. And understanding that the needs of almost all the artists that we met and talked with fall somewhere within this chart. And so thinking about that and, making your case, making an argument for what you need support for in your community. This is also a visual from First Peoples Fund, and again, mentioning the Native Artist Professional Development Training. We have a whole afternoon on marketing and helping artists with portfolios and marketing materials, and our manual goes into this in pretty extensive detail. A great artist portfolio is critical for success in applying for any of the opportunities that I've talked about, any of the established artists' higher value opportunities in particular. In my experience, this is a process though, and you start out with the basics, and as you progress on your artist journey, you're enhancing and continually updating your materials. I show a photo of Don Montelos, just a brief part of his artist statement, and I've always thought that was really neat. He just in simple terms talks about what his mission is, and understanding what your mission is as an artist. He wants to portray the Lakota, the Native Americans, in an honest way, to illustrate them as people who hunted buffalo, made love, raised children, cooked meals, and lived. And anybody who sees his art can see that vibrancy, that he uses. Different is an artist bio, where he is listing, and if you go to his website, you'll see the difference. He's listing, the year he was born, where he lives, who he's studying, and where he went to school, where his degrees are. So that would be the difference between an artist bio and an artist statement. So understanding the basic terms that I'm presenting here, what people are looking for in a good artist resume. And another thing I've done in my own research for my work with First Peoples Fund, but also for my own artist portfolio materials, is again, going back to that suggestion I had earlier, is looking at other artists who I aspire, to be like, or who I admire, I guess is what I should say. And saying, well, what does their resume look like? And a lot of times, artists will share that with you, or, or it's on their website. What does a good artist statement look like? What do other people's promotional materials look like? I think it's really important to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, having a good artist network, or creating one even within your community, is always, helpful, because you're, kind of going forward and working together in that instance. And a lot of times the artists and fellows in the First Peoples Fund family of artists are working together in that way. Um, and I know a number of you are out there on the phone in this webinar. So working with museums, as I mentioned earlier, a number of museums are now charged by their boards of directors with new policies that challenge the museums to think, act, and be more inclusive and diverse. So now is a good time to approach museums and offer consultation services if you have something to offer. I'm working with a couple of museums in Maine, for example, as we approach the 200-year anniversary of the state of Maine, the bicentennial. And, we're not really focusing on the fact that the statehood, you know, is anything to celebrate. Certainly not. But we want to show a strong Wabanaki presence and show our own sovereignty through our art. That's the goal. And so I'm really excited to be working on some of those things. And I was invited, but then I also invited myself onto a couple of initiatives. So, I think it's, something that museums are looking for too, looking for people in the Native community, especially if you're near areas with a large Native population. Think about going in and doing research. I mean, I listed some opportunities earlier where you can apply for research at museums, but don't wait to be asked. The Peabody Museum in Massachusetts has opportunities, which I don't think I listed, but I encouraged a basket maker to go down there recently and hire themselves out to spend a couple of days in the collections and look at the baskets and help identify the tribes, for example, that are represented there, especially the northern baskets from Maine. And I think they're following through with that. So this person got themselves a job for a couple of days or a week. Curating exhibitions, solo artist exhibitions, artist demonstrations, of course, workshops, teaching classes, artists in residence we talked about, public art commissions, etc. This was an artist exhibition. I visited a solo artist exhibition of Hilary Kempenick, a First Peoples Fund Fellow, and got to see her artist talk last year at the Watermark Art Center in Bemidji, Minnesota. And it's just really exciting to see Native artists with solo art exhibitions. Of course, some people know Nicholas Galanin, and he has been, and he's kind of showing internationally now and at the Heard Museum and major museums in New York. And so these can be opportunities that arise anywhere now. So these are museums that I kind of put together this list with Native art programs or significant collections. So these would be museums you could approach. There's one that I left off here that I forgot. The Spokane Museum, called Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture, has the largest collection of Plateau Indian art in the world. And I know a number of Plateau artists who are starting to do more work there at that museum, particularly with the collections. And especially, again, as people, age, and we need, they need elders in particular to be looking at their collections and helping to identify and interpret, from an indigenous standpoint, a specifically Plateau Native artist standpoint, about what's in the collections before it's too late, especially in an area, in places like these. The Idle Museum in Indianapolis is great to work with. The Heard Museum, of course, a lot of these natural suspects. New Mexico Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. Other nonprofit arts funding, I did mention, again, this fellowship term that's used in many ways. So this is basically a job in collections preservation. I think I saw this on the First Peoples Fund website and threw this in the other day. As I was saying, as I was preparing this webinar, more and more opportunities kept showing up. And so this is basically a 12-week job in Minneapolis. And this Midwest Art Conservation Center, I think, is within the Minneapolis Institute of Art, right in the city there. And it's a great opportunity with a deadline of March 15, 2019. And you basically would go in and let's see if there's more information now. But you can go to the website to learn more, but it's basically to help interpret the collections, as I talked to a minute ago about using the other example. Okay, here's some verbiage I have on it. The fellow will work with the senior preventative conservator on variety activities, including art handling, collection assessment, conservation documentation, collection database use and design, and technical research and writing. The fellow will gain firsthand experience of evaluation techniques and approaches through participation in off-site general collection assessments. So it's pretty neat. So it's not just, to have a paid position, but you're also going to be, gaining experience and technique. This is something that people can find employment for, really at any time, approaching museums and cultural centers to share your skills. Looking at these demonstrations just happened in December at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture in Santa Fe. I see my friend Char Holybear, was demonstrating beadwork on Sunday, December 9th. And so artist demonstrations can, net you anywhere from, depending on the museum, $100 to, $750, depending upon, is it an hour or a couple hours or how much you're sharing, and so it isn't always about teaching either. I often encourage, especially in some of these really arduous art forms like, basket making and beadworking, is just, how much can someone learn, really in an hour, but demonstrating, you can, people can learn a lot by watching. But if I were in Santa Fe, I think I'd probably say, hey, can you get me on your schedule next year? Just thinking about supplementing my income before Christmas. So small jobs. These are commissions, and the late First Peoples Fund Fellow and Community Spirit Award recipient David Moses Bridges here on the left actually built that birch bark canoe for the late Andrew Wyeth, who is one of the most foremost recognized American painters of the 20th century. And this is him paddling that in Maine near the island that Andrew Wyeth owned. And I think that was something David kind of lucked into, but a great private commission. The wood panels on the right reside at the Sealaska Heritage Institute, the Walter Soboleff building in Juneau, Alaska. They were carved by First Peoples Fund fellows David A. Boxley, who's also a Community Spirit Award recipient, and David Boxley Jr. And I believe this was around the cost of about $250,000. And so the public commissions can be very lucrative. These are Shimshin artists, and they're internationally recognized. It's almost 40 feet wide by 15 feet high, and it's thought to be the largest carved and painted Shimshin house front in the world. And for those of you who have been in this building, then the Preston Singletary glasswork inside the actual house is also astounding. And so this public art work field is very lucrative, but at the same time, it's a lot of responsibility and a lot of work. So First Peoples Fund Fellow and Community Spirit Award recipient Lillian Pitt has done these large outdoor commissions too in the Columbia River Basin in Oregon. She's Warm Springs. But she's had to deal with contractors and subcontractors and insurance. So these projects sound really big, and they are, and they can be, very lucrative financially, but it's also a lot of work for a single artist. So a lot of times it's spread out over several years. And so I don't know the details of the Boxley Commission at the Walter Soboleff House, but I'd be interested now. It's my guess is that it was probably a public art project through the state of Alaska, and you could probably find it, by Googling around enough. But I remember, being in front of the panels, I took that picture, and that was the figure that I heard and wrote down. but of course, a tremendous amount, probably a couple years' work for the two of them. So, percent for art programs, this would be where 1% of the building cost, and I believe that was the case on that Sealaska Heritage Institute building in Juneau, 1% goes to art. And so this is still a very active program, and I'm showing the website here. And so you might just take a look and see, if the state you're residing in offers this program and what the details are. And they don't have to be enormous installations either. I guess I'm showing another one here. This is a project in Hawaii, and they have funding for school projects and library projects to hire the services of a professional visual artist chosen by the Art Advisory Committee. So culminating a work of art at the school or the library might include sculpture, fashioned out of metal, stone, glass, concrete, or wall murals or ceramics. And so in this case, they're specifying they wanted ceramics or glass or stone, concrete sculpture, and you can see the cost. And the year 2015, this artist, Rick Mills, did this in the Manoa Public Library. It's really quite beautiful installation. And so this is called installation art, public art, and very few Indigenous artists are involved in this work yet. And so this is why I wanted to bring it to our attention. And I think some of the basket makers were looking at this in the state of Maine and trying to figure out how to get into this, because it is a contract project and these do require, a lot of planning and working with architects. Usually you could see that had to happen on the building projects and the outdoor projects that Lillian Pitt was working on. And so there's a lot to it, but I think too, the state was willing to work with our artists when we talked about it at one point. We didn't follow through to try to get through the process, because like anything, it's just an unfamiliar process for most Indigenous artists. But as you can see, some have really broken through and done this. Okay, so I'm a couple minutes over my time, just going to finish this up, and we're there at the end anyway. But I did want to just say, people have asked me, like, what is my key to, some of the success that I've had. I will say I gave an artist talk, this is why it's on this list, in 2017 for 35 minutes at the Portland Museum of Art, and I was paid $3,500. And again, I'm just sharing that information with you. I probably sweated about it for about a month, so that was a lot of work. But also, I will say, I said yes to almost everything in the beginning to get my name and reputation out there. I'm a bit more selective now. I was a co-curator on an exhibition for the Portland Museum of Art, and so, that was why I was asked to give that talk. But now I can be more selective, and but in the beginning, I really did a lot of things that I didn't necessarily want to do. I remember being at a demonstration at a museum in Boston, and my niece, who was in her late teens, she was really kind of put out by our treatment and, my treatment. And I mean, it wasn't disrespectful or anything, but it wasn't as courteous as it could have been. The pay wasn't as great as it could have been. But I just told her, sometimes you have to do these things until you get to the fun and interesting stuff. It's going to be hard work to get there. And any established artists will tell you that whatever you're working on, you're going to have to work really hard and on your artist path, and look for mentors and role models in the arts opportunity world. And again, if you see someone being successful, ask them how they're doing it. Which museums are they working with? Create or join an artist network. And the last thing I'll say is never give up. I applied for the United States Artist Fellowship 6 times. And I still haven't been chosen. I've been nominated 6 times, and I was somewhat relieved to not be nominated this year. Not sure how I would have felt with one of my members of the same Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance. Now, I'm kidding. I'm very happy and delighted that Gabriel Frey won, but I think for my ego, I'm just as glad I wasn't in the same application pool as he. But don't give up. Keep trying, and if someone nominates me again, I'll probably try again. And finally, consider hosting, if you're a tribal organization or a nonprofit, or certainly an artist attending a First Peoples Fund Native Artist Professional Development Training to help the artist gain the skills and confidence necessary to successfully apply for arts opportunities. And with that, I thank you for your patience, for me going a little bit over, and for your time. And I'll see if I can see any questions in the chat. Oh, wow. Other people are posting other opportunities. Thank you very much for sharing. That's wonderful. I'm here now, so if people had like a burning question, I can see it now. I don't know if I can scroll back to the others, but again, I really appreciate the audience. Okay, yeah. Someone asked, what's the advice on communicating and working with museums? I think, really just trying to get your foot in the door and ask for a meeting with, museum staff. If you have a contact already, that's a good idea. If not, ask for a meeting to introduce yourself and share what your gifts may be or what your knowledge area is. If you have something to offer, and be confident about it, because I do think museums are looking to help bring in more native art and artists, especially, as we are the experts on those objects and that spirit that's within those collections. After you get a award, grant, press releases. Hi, Margaret. Well, I think just using social media and trying to get the word out there that you have received an award, and contacting the local newspaper. A lot of times, sometimes they will contact you too, because they want to have a good art story, and just putting all that together in the press. The artist in residence that I mentioned, the artist will be provided with full room and board and travel support to and from the site. And so usually they are fully funded, and the stipend is just like kind of your pay, So again, $2,000 for a month is maybe not as much as you normally would make. But if you're getting free room and board and kind of a vacation away from all the headaches of home and a chance to make your art and be around other artists in a great place, it's really nice. Yeah, and I see questions about Southern California too. And so, yeah, I think I don't have resources for that area. I have to say, a lot of the links and resources I was sharing were from, places I've worked and been associated with. But I think reaching out, and you can certainly Google and find resources there. And California grants, I would connect with Seventh Generation Fund too, and they're in Northern California, but they can really point you to any resources in Southern California. They've been around for, gosh, got to be going toward 40 years now. They do great work. Yeah, certainly California Basket Weavers Association. They've been a great organization and formed prior to the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance. Yeah, all of the whole presentation will be available in our webinar resource library at First Peoples Fund, and in a few weeks. So all the links, the slides, my presenter notes, and a resource guide, which will basically have that as well. Are there any other questions that I've missed? If you could maybe repeat, I'm sorry. I'm trying to read through all the chat. Okay, people are asking about recommendations to help with the writing, and that I won't say that stumped me, but um, I'm going to have to think about that. I don't know. I guess I would go to that Siri resource that I mentioned. The one in Alaska, that link that I showed, Siri Foundation, CIRI Foundation.org, and there, some really good tips in there. And I still encourage people to look at the websites of the opportunities that you're applying for, and they'll often be like that RICO World Story that I shared. There'll often be a story and a project that's highlighted. And, you'll see Indigenous artists who have received similar grants, and read their story that they put together, for their application. And I know I talked about this before. I'm always getting teased by my sons about repeating myself, but I do recommend, if you have an opportunity to be on a grant review panel anywhere, take it. Because I've sat on a number. It's really surprising how that works. And, every panel is different, and, every organization is different. But yet at the same time, you really can learn what that organization prioritizes, what their value system is, what they're looking for. And, you can extrapolate that out to other similar foundations, and it can be really interesting. links, yes. Yeah, that's a lot. Anybody else have any questions? Thanks again, everybody, for your attendance, and I hope everybody's staying warm out there. Why I didn't do it to GoFundMe? I think because I was intimidated by the aspect of making a video. It used to be making your own video was such an expensive undertaking, and you'd hire filmmakers. You probably still should, I don't know. But kind of that do-it-yourself video. And I was going to do it actually for the organization I worked for 21 years that I founded, the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance. And I still think it's a good idea. The one thing I was thinking of too there was just highlighting one project, because a lot of times people get really hung up on, I want to do this, I want to do that, I have all these ideas, but try to focus on one thing, one project. Like we were going to focus on the Traditional Arts Apprenticeship Program, where we funded one mentor every year for 21 years. We funded, mentors within tribal communities to teach one person, one-on-one, the tradition of Maine Indian basketry. And we managed to save our own art form that way by lowering the average age of basket makers from 63 to 40, and we increased numbers from about 55 founding members to almost 200 at the end of that 21-year stint. And so the one program that was really, really critical to us was the Traditional Arts Apprenticeship Program. So we had all these other things going. We were operating a store, we were running markets, we were doing workshops in the tribal communities, but we just were going to focus, and that's how we were successful in our grant writing too. We focused on one problem that we needed to solve, one project idea. And I will say, again, I should have added that to my list sometimes of what people do wrong, is you have too many ideas. Try to distill it down to what's the most critical one. Yeah, I think so too, highlighting one project when you're applying for artist in residence as well, and one, really one need or resource that you want to highlight. But again, you also need to fit it to what they're asking for. But I've seen the buckshot approach, asking for 20 different things, and talking about doing like 20 different projects. I mean, or even I'm exaggerating, or 3 or 4. No one has time for that, and they know that, the reviewers, and they think, geez, this person is having a hard time focusing down. Okay, everybody, I'm kind of talked out if you don't have any other questions. But if you do, feel free. I was joking. Okay, thanks, everybody. Great to see you, Sylvia and Cody and others who've been in the trainings. Thanks for sticking with me. Brenda, hi. Okay, great. Keep up the good work out there, everybody, too. I think Bonnie was there as well. Okay, I guess this is becoming like a Walton's goodbye, so I think I'll sign off. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. And then people can always email me, too. Let me write my email. Oops. Oh, gosh, I can't even type. Okay, so that's my email, and I'm pretty much always there. And so if anybody has a quick question, or you know something in your artist applying opportunities, especially before our resource kit is available, feel free to shoot me a question. A lot of people know I'm on Facebook too, and it's just Theresa Secord, and I enjoy messaging with other artists and sharing whatever tips I can whenever I can. So feel free. Nice to see you, Linda, as well. Take care, Ed, everybody. Thanks again. Okay, bye.